It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. And so we've come to the end of a pretty long journey. This week's Monster Mondays will look at the final film from Gamera, 2006's Gamera the Brave. Now, technically, I'm calling this a Millennium Era movie to compare it to the 21st Century Godzilla films, but also technically this is still considered Heisei, only because the Gamera films really are just kind of broken down between Showa and Heisei. Godzilla split their Heisei era movies between the 80s and 90s movies and the Millennium Era, just to kind of help separate the two eras, because they had two very different directions that series took. But this is also a completely rebooted concept for Gamera, but still, I digress. But once again, Gamera stayed back and waited his turn while Godzilla was carrying on with the Millennium Era that began with Godzilla 2000 in 1999 and then ended with Godzilla Final Wars in 2004. And at that point, Godzilla was done. And it was time for the Americans to work with Toho to try again, and it would take 10 years to get there. So Gamera stepped in with a new film of his own during that time off for the Big G. But it's not for trying to extend the Heisei series that ended in 1999 with Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris. There were outlines and plots created for at least two more Gamera films, now just kind of referred to as G4 and G5. Now, while fan films did try to carry on the Heisei series that Kaneko had made, but with this second reboot, it was decided to not connect this film to those 90s movies. And this was partially due to a self-inflicted wound done in Revenge of Iris. Exploring deeper themes of living life with kaiju being a real thing, Gamera 3's human villains were given some credence to their assertion that Gamera was an evil force that is a threat to humanity. Granted, they thought Gamera was a demon of some sort, but a big part of Iris is that the creature bonds with a girl who has an intense hatred of Gamera. She blamed our main hero for being the reason why her parents and her beloved cat were killed when Gamera was fighting Gauss in 1995. Iris fed upon that hatred, and now we have a human character in this series that was always found humans to be at worst unaware of Gamera's better intentions, now actively working against Gamera and trying to get revenge for the creature's sort of aloof handling of his battles that could gravely injure or kill tens of thousands of people or more in a heartbeat. So while Gamera 3 would be hailed by many as one of the greatest monster movies ever made by many fans, the portrayal of Gamera as having little regard toward humans when he was fighting a monster greatly hurt the character's reputation in many fans' eyes. So Gamera was always the good guy. He was always a massive savior that helped children, almost like Superman would save Lois Lane. The third film, for however good and interesting it was, did shine a different light on the hero that made it difficult to justify desire to see a fourth and fifth film in the series. So it was time for a reboot. And as early as 2002, plans about what to do with Gamera actually kind of perked a lot of people's ears up with an announcement to finally bring Godzilla and Gamera together in a single film. Daiei also announced a new Daimajin film. But Toho eventually declined the offers to have Gamera and Godzilla together in a film, and that was basically the end of that talk. But behind closed doors, executives were split on the Gamera series as a whole. Those who helped make the Showa-era films despised the Heisei trilogy and refused to recognize them as true Gamera films. Those involved with the Heisei trilogy didn't like the Showa films, and almost all, including director Shusuke Kaneko, would publicly say the Godzilla films of the Showa era were just flat out better than those made by the studio they were working for. This actually nearly got Gamera Guardian of the Universe canceled, or at least any sequels being made getting canceled as well. But then Gamera 3 was upsetting for several children because Gamera was given that harder edge so the main villain could have a serious point of view that needed to be explored in the plot. So Gamera the Brave would soften the series from the quite mature Heisei era of the 90s and kind of return it to a sort of a way to its roots. And the story for this movie is a rework of some of the earlier concepts from an early version of the Guardian of the Universe script. While Gamera the Brave would end up being a box office failure, Daiei Film opted to recenter this new Gamera film on being friendly to children and families. This takes a little bite out of the series, but let's get into the plot because there are some really interesting concepts in this film and there are some things I absolutely adore about it. Now, the movie begins in 1973 with a portion of this town on fire, and the town is being attacked by who else? By several Gauss creatures. So a young boy who is evacuating with the rest of the town watches as Gamera arrives to fight the Gauss creatures. The lasers from Gauss do what they always do, which is slice at Gamera's skin. And when Gamera falls to the ground, the Gauss creatures swarm over him and begin to take bites out of him until he returns to his feet. There, he starts to glow, and the trio of Gauss creatures realize something is wrong and they try to fly away, but then Gamera explodes, sacrificing himself for the town by wiping out the Gauss creatures. The kid looks on solemnly while the rest of the town celebrates that, yeah, they've been saved by Gamera. Now, 33 years later, that boy, Kausuke, has a son of his own, Toru. Now, Toru's mother died, but while Kausuke tries to ease his son's mind about how his mother is always there with him, looking down on them from above, Toru says that he doesn't need to hear that sort of stuff. You know, Toru narrates that his mother died in a car accident, and he knows that she's not in heaven. She's a pile of bones and dust in her grave. And this, he says, is his first summer since she's died. As he and his father walk along the coast, Toru looks across the ocean and sees a flashing kind of orangish red light on an atoll in the water. Now, news reports state that another boat has gone missing. With each passing report of a missing boat, the closer it gets to Japan. Also, another report is given about how a council that used to be in charge of dealing with giant monsters has been disbanded by the government. And it seems as though monsters are becoming almost a kind of less and less part of everyday life since Gamera wiped out Gauss in the 70s. Now later, when Toru sees the flashing orange glint from the atoll once again, he swims out to basically see what it is. And when he reaches it, he finds an egg sitting on top of a peculiar red stone that's giving off that light. And when he picks the egg up, it begins to hatch, and out comes a little turtle that he names Toto. Toto was his mother's nickname for him when she would basically, it was like her pet name for him when he was little. So there is a very distinct pattern on the turtle's belly that Toru calls out, saying, wow, you got really neat markings. They're very similar to what we saw glow in that 1973 scene with Gamera before he sacrificed himself. But Toto grows quickly, and he also seems to be showing signs of advanced intelligence. When Toru talks to Toto, the turtle seems to almost respond by squeaking or chirping at him. It turns out that Toto can fly. Yeah, Toru's neighbor and friend, a girl named Mai, is also aware that Toto seems to be a little too unusual for a regular old turtle. But knowing that he can't have a pet and Toto's abilities seem to maybe be a little bit too much for him to hide from his father, Toru tries taking the turtle to the beach and leave him there, but Toto follows him all the way home. And when Toto is trying to get to Toro by walking in the street, Toro has to save the turtle when it's nearly hit and run over by a truck. And he explains to Toto that that's probably when he should fly. And, when there's that kind of trouble around. But while Toru is showing off the turtle to some of his buddies, Mai begins to get a little worried. And she shows Toru information about Gamera. And she thinks that this little turtle will grow to get real big and start stomping around and shooting fire out of its mouth. Now, after just another day, Toto has grown exponentially again, and Toru still refuses to think that his pet is going to become Gamera. And he especially doesn't want Toto to be Gamera because monsters fight to the death, and he does not want Toto to die. But Toru decides to give Mai the glowing red rock that served as Toto's nest so that she can have it for good luck before she goes into her surgery. Now, elsewhere, a survivor from one of those shipwrecks that we heard a little bit about is floating on a life preserver only to start seeing some of his crewmates' stuff floating to the surface of the ocean. And soon, he's pulled underwater where it appears that he is eaten by some unseen creature. But then when Toru and Toto are perched on a rock looking out into the ocean, Toto starts to look out into the direction of where the Coast Guard finds the ill-fated sailor's stuff from one of those shipwrecks. And the next day, Toto is nowhere to be found, and Toru thinks that Toto left because he just didn't want to be friends anymore. The next day, a siren goes off, causing much of the townsfolk to run for safety, and they're told to evacuate to the school. And as they do, a giant lizard-like creature begins stomping through town. This creature is eventually known as Zetus, and it is not a friendly monster. In fact, it begins to actually eat people. It was the creature that ate the guy in the ocean in the previous scene. But luckily, there's another monster who can help fight against Zetus, and that's Toto. But maybe now more recognizably Gamera, as Kausuke calls him. The only problem, though, is that Zetus is fully grown and Gamera is not so much. He's still a kid and not exactly the best fighting monster, but he's got spunk. Gamera learns how to at least repel Zetus the first time by grabbing the bad monster's long, sharp, stabby tongue, ride it up to the monster's mouth, and then blast him with his fire breath. Zetus retreats, but the JSDF arrived to capture the tuckered out Gamera. Now, the government isn't so much capturing Gamera for nefarious reasons. They actually want to take him to a Gamera expert, somebody who knew all about Gamera 33 years prior. And so they try to help Gamera heal by using a liquid infused with these red scarlet pearls that were found after the previous Gamera exploded. But the worry is that Zetus will return to eat more people, and if Gamera isn't ready or grown to full size, this is going to be a disaster. But meanwhile, Toru and Kausuke learn that Mei's operation was successful. However, she kept muttering in her sleep that Toto needs the stone that Toru gave her. And Toru and his friends decide that they need to go into town, get the stone, and they want to deliver it to the scientists helping Gamera. But when Zetus gets to Nagoya Harbor, Gamera wakes up as if he senses the monster's arrival. And sure enough, Zetus tears into the warehouse where Gamera is recuperating. And while Nagoya evacuates, Toru and his friends rush to get the stone from Mei. But elsewhere in town, Gamera is still grown, but he's still too young to really successfully fight Zetus. But damn it if our hero doesn't try, right? But Toru is still worried about Toto, or who he keeps referring to as Toto. He doesn't want him to keep fighting Zetus. He does not want him to become Gamera. He wants him to run away and stay safe, because if Toto keeps fighting, he might blow himself up like the Gamera did 33 years ago. Mei even tries to get out of her shelter that she's been evacuated to so that she can get the stone to Gamera to power him up fully, but she's too weak. However, a little girl nearby takes the stone and understands that she needs to quote, help get it to Toto, unquote. And this little girl is an absolute champ. She's booking it into the chaos with the stone to get it to our turtle buddy. And she even knows when to hand it off to the next kid with the simple instruction that this is, quote, for Toto. Now that kid runs into more chaos and is even able to pass the stone off to another kid when a policeman grabs him. This is really good stuff as kid after kid takes the stone like a relay before it eventually ends up in Toru's hands. It's nice. It's kind of a nice new take on the bond that the old Gamera would have with kids. Now Toru gets the stone and tells his dad that it's time for him to get this to Toto. And his dad even warns him that this might give Toto the power to blow himself up to stop Zetus. But Toru says that he's not going to do that. Father and son, that he's not going to do that, and he's going to fight to the end and survive this battle. And so father and son go into the building that Gamera is stuck in after being flung into it by Zetus to toss the stone into Gamera's mouth just as Zetus climbs up the building to continue his attack. And Toru says that all these kids ran to get this stone to him, but not to sacrifice himself, to live, to win the day. And with the stone, Gamera gets his spinny flying ability that he's always had in previous movies, and he uses that to knock Zetus off a building. But Zetus still uses his stabby tongue thing to fight back. But Gamera's chest begins to glow just as it did when his predecessor sacrificed himself. And Toru tells a guy who's trying to evacuate him and his father that, because it looks like he's about to self-destruct, that he knows he's not going to self-destruct. And Gamera tears Zetus's tongue out and uses that glowing power to melt the part that was still stuck to him. And then he lets out a massive fireball attack that completely destroys Zetus. Now, Gamera collapses from being pretty worn out after all this, but before the government can capture Gamera again, Toru and all the kids in the city block the road so Gamera can wake up and fly away to safety. Toru says his goodbyes to Toto, and the giant turtle gets up and flies off, and Toru wishes his pet well and actually calls him by his rightful name, Gamera. Then the credits play as we watch a little turtle walking around roads and tables and other stuff and just doing little turtle things. Let's talk about 3 things I like about Gamera the Brave, and I start with how much I like the look of this movie. This movie is set in summer, and everything about this movie looks like a summer day. When Toru goes swimming, there's this kind of orangish filter creating haze like it's warm. You can just kind of feel the heat from the hot weather. You have wonderful sound work where you have crickets chirping at night because the windows are open because it's summer, it's hot. It's great. There's this freeness and energy to the movie particularly in the first act that feels like being a kid who is out of school and just enjoying the summer. And it just has this warm feeling to the entire movie that I do adore. Next, to go along with the summer feel of this movie, there's a wonderful focus on this kid. And I don't want to say that it was sorely missing from the Kaneko trilogy, because those films are great in terms of maturity. But in this film, we get something else. We get this lovely little story about a boy who has a dear friend who lives next door who needs to have this very serious heart surgery. And he also finds this turtle who also needs to learn some things as he grows as well, so he can ultimately become Gamera. Toru is someone who is completely constantly dealing with or always worrying about things he loves leaving him. When Toto sneaks out of his hiding place, Toru has this dream about the turtle flying away from him. He's already trying to deal with the loss of his mother. And then there's the stuff with Mei. And there's something incredibly charming about Toru and Mei in this movie that makes it something kind of special in the grand scheme of the Gamera franchise. Mei's heart surgery frightens her, and the closer it gets to that surgery, the more scared she gets, the more because the first time we see her, she's very playful. She's, Toru even calls her a pain in the neck when he wants to borrow the manga that she had bought. And there, as each scene passes, the more somber she becomes. And so, it's something, for a little while, it's not something that Toru is aware of. And he has to learn why she sometimes says the things like how she may not always be around to help him the next time he gets in trouble. And it also makes him think about his mother, realizing that he might lose another feminine presence in his life. There are just some fantastically touching scenes between Toru and Mei throughout this movie. And I wrap up my likes with a pretty simple one, and that's a great appreciation for the effects work in this movie. Gamera and Gauss at the start of the movie look great, although it is mostly kept at nighttime, so it's not as easy to see. But the Toto/Baby Gamera looks fantastic. Zetus is a little bit more a classic Gamera villain design from in comparison to what we saw in the 90s. Still looks really good. This movie couldn't have been made on much of a budget, but it does look good. The scenes with Toto/Baby Gamera fighting Zetus, they're all great. I mean, honestly, these scenes look as good as a Godzilla film, particularly at that, in the 90s. And even better, all those Toto, Baby Gamera, and Zetus fight scenes are done in daylight. So everything is there on the screen, and it just looks great. Now, Gamera the Brave would be the last official Gamera project until 2023, when the 6-part anime miniseries Gamera Rebirth was released. And I will someday look at that, but we've reached the end of the Gamera cinematic journey. I'm not sure if Gamera will return anytime soon to theaters or live action films. Americans can barely go to see a movie just for Godzilla, so I'm not even sure if Daiei is interested, or if anybody is interested in bringing back the Gamera character. I think it would be more likely to see more animated features, because seeing anyone, before seeing anyone thinking about doing a live action series or movie. But either way, Gamera enjoyed over 40 years of being in theaters with varying degrees of entertainment and quality. And Gamera is still a name that anyone in the world of kaiju fandom would know and have at least some appreciation for. Now, while I am done with covering these movies on Monster Mondays, these movies are still a fun thing to watch. And I think, I will probably revisit this series sooner than I expected to originally. Now, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at FilmSeizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. And you can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we stay in Japan and return to the world of Ultra Q as I take a look at 3 more episodes: I Saw a Bird, Garadama, and Tokyo Ice Age. So until next week, stay spooky.